Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Pensions Committee. I've got a few introductions. We've got a new member on this morning, which is Mike Stannard from the City Council. And welcome, Mike. I would also like to thank Paul Hewitt, his predecessor, for his contribution to the committee. So thank you for that. I'll just go very quickly over to housekeeping. This meeting is being held in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on the County Council's YouTube channel. The recording will also be available to view afterwards. A fire alarm test is not expected during the meeting. If the alarms sound, we must evacuate County Hall. In the event of an emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster point located in the main car park. Microphones. When using your microphone, please make sure it is switched on and speak towards it. This will tell the cameras to focus on you and ensure you can be heard on the live stream. When you have finished speaking, please push the button to turn off your microphone, as this will allow the system to pick up the next speaker. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda, the first item is apologies for absence. Nicola.
Thank you. Apologies received from Councillor the Lord Fuller, Steve Aspin and Steve Morphy. You may be a few minutes late.
Thank you. The next item is the minutes, approval of the minutes, which are on page 5. Can you confirm that you agree with the minutes as they are, or has anybody got any? Okay, thank you. I'll sign those. Declaration of interest. Do members have any interest they wish to declare? No. Okay. So we move on to administrative report, which is on page 9, and that's in the hands of Glenn. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Item 4, page 9. This is a quarterly update to Pensions Committee on the operations of the Norfolk Pension Fund and the LGPS nationally. We start on this page just looking at the recommendations. There are 2 admissions to note at the end of this report, and there is the novation of a number of admissions as well as part of that recommendation. Moving on to the report highlights. As discussed at the June Pensions Committee, the government rejected the access pools proposal under the Fit for Future consultation and instructed both the access pool and the Brunel pool, the authorities within those pools, to find new partner pools. A total of 11 access funds and 10 Brunel funds were therefore looking for a new pooling home. Now, we discussed this as a committee in June and gave you an update. And as part of that June meeting, there is a recommendation, and that recommendation went to the County Council on the 22nd of July. And that was an important recommendation and delegation. It was a delegation from County Council back to this committee, to Pensions Committee, to authorise the approval of that new pooling partner for the Norfolk Pension Fund. Now there is a recommendation related to this on today's agenda under item 10. In addition to the pooling and investment matters contained in the Fit for Future consultation, the government has also confirmed its intention to implement a number of good governance measures as well. While we await further details, including the statutory guidance relating to this good governance reform, we'll have the opportunity to explore some of these proposals at our training in November. Once the statutory guidance relating to good governance is published, we intend to undertake an impact analysis in terms of how this will impact on the Norfolk Pension Fund, and we'll report back to committee. The government's consultation called Access and Fairness, which covered various aspects of member benefits, scheme member benefits, that closed in early August, and we now await the government's consultation and analysis and response to that consultation. And as previously highlighted to committee, the potential impact on the pension fund of both devolution and local government reorganisation is being closely monitored by the pension fund's management team. We, as officers, we are engaged in corporate activity, including participating in a number of programme work streams relating to both devolution and local government review, and we'll keep the committee informed as and when there's developments and information to bring back and report to committee. And then the final item, just to note on this slide, the terms of reference for the Pensions Oversight Board were updated at the board's last meeting, presented to the board, and they're discussed further under item 5 today. Moving on and turning to the work of the Scheme Advisory Board. The board has organised its first annual assembly meeting for both committee and board chairs. So chairs of both pension committees and pension boards, and that's taking place on the 22nd of October. Now this follows a series of successful meetings held for committee and board chairs during the Fit for Future consultation. And the Scheme Advisory Board is keen to continue that dialogue and engagement with local funds, and I think that's a really good thing. The Scheme Advisory Board has also recently sought legal advice. That's in relation to the governance structures of pools. The advice considers the different pooling and governance models currently in use within the LGPS and other comparable schemes, and the intention there is to develop a wider pooling and pooling guidance around good governance. The Norfolk Pension Fund and other LGPS funds have received letters from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign alleging that LGPS administering authorities are in breach of their legal obligations in relation to the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The letter and the accompanying detailed position paper was prepared by lawyers, and we circulated a copy to both Pensions Committee and Pension Board members. This is similar to the allegations made last year, whereby the board commissioned legal advice from Nigel Giffen. The Scheme Advisory Board is considering whether it needs to seek further advice from a KC, from Nigel Giffen. The Scheme Advisory Board has made a couple of statements published on its website, giving update in terms of the action it is taking. It is assisting funds to act collectively in responding to this challenge. It appreciates the issues are complex, particularly those concerning the application of international law. And the board has therefore written to MHCLG and the Minister for Local Government, asking for a statement to be issued. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign has also asked government directly for a response. We'll keep committee informed of developments in relation to this matter. Over the summer, the Norfolk Pension Fund received correspondence via the Action Network Stop Arming Israel campaign. To date, we have been contacted by 96 individuals, of whom 55 are Scheme Me follow-up correspondence. And then finally, before we leave this slide, just a reminder that all these statements and all this information is available on the Scheme Advisory Board's website, and including recent survey around diversity and peer support, and also a short consultation on LGPS Code of Transparency. Moving on to this next slide, this presents our risk management framework. It's the latest heat map for the Norfolk Pension Fund. Details can be found in Appendix C on page 30. The management team are responsible for monitoring risks and risk mitigation. The heat map for this quarter identifies no changes in the identified risks or the risk scores. The risks are stable. There are two high red risks. One relates to cybersecurity, the other is fit for the future LGPS investment pooling. As part of our ongoing mitigation of the cybersecurity risks, the Fund has recently updated and presented to the June Pensions Committee the Fund's cyber and data security strategy. The mitigation around investment pooling is discussed further under item 10 on today's agenda. Referring to Appendix D in your papers, page 31, I'm pleased to report it's been another strong performance, or strong quarter for performance against service targets for our member services, payroll and systems teams. These are important indicators for our service and feature in LGPS benchmarking and as part of our annual accounts and report disclosure. I'm very pleased to announce that the Norfolk Pension Fund and the LGPS Frameworks team have been shortlisted as finalists in a number of local and national awards. It's well-deserved recognition for the innovation and hard work and commitment of the teams and the individuals concerned. And while we were unsuccessful at last week's County Council Oscars, I had my fingers crossed in terms of the remaining national awards. Moving now to scheme communications. The first of those is around scheme members. I'm pleased to report that the annual benefit statements were available online at the end of August. This is an important date. It's a statutory publication date for annual benefit statements. And over the last week, we have also posted out 58,000 scheme member annual benefit statements, and they've been landing on doormats. In addition to providing our members with their personal pension statements contained in the annual benefit statement booklets, there's lots of useful information about the fund and the wider scheme. We also use the annual benefit statements to promote pension clinics to scheme members. These take place in the autumn, and we're offering a number of face-to-face meetings with scheme members in Norwich, Great Yarmouth, Kings Lynn and Cromer. We are also about to issue pension saving statements to those members who have exceeded their annual allowance in tax year 24-25. And we report on this slide that the last employer forum, hybrid employer forum, was on the 8th of July, where we delivered presentations to our scheme employers around the valuation, LGPS polling, and also pensions dashboard programme. Our next employer forum is at the end of November. Last week, from the 15th to the 19th of September, was Pensions Awareness Week, a national campaign encouraging people to think about their pensions planning. This year, the fund provided ideas and material resources to our scheme employers, encouraging them to promote the campaign, and we published articles on our website. Turning now to knowledge and understanding. A reminder to committee that as good practice, we adopted a training strategy in 2020. That strategy covers pension committee members, pension board members, and also Norfolk Pension Fund officers. It's recently been updated to include new requirements coming from the TPR's General Code. And we are mindful of the good governance recommendations in the Fit for Future consultations. And this will make it a requirement for committee, board and officers to have the appropriate level of knowledge and understanding to fulfil their roles going forward. We'll need to consider these implementations in the context of our training strategy and training plans when that statutory guidance is issued. Planning continues for our combined committee and board training. That's taking place on the 13th and 14th of November. If you would like to attend, please do contact Elaine as soon as possible. We'd like to finalise the bookings and make those arrangements. The 2 days offer a fantastic opportunity to learn about and discuss in an informal setting outside of committee and board some of the key topics within the LGPS at the moment. We've got some fantastic speakers lined up talking about topics such as LGPS pooling, fiduciary responsibility, responsible investment, good governance, cyber security, and the work of the Scheme Advisory Board. And as a final reminder and plug to the Online Learning Academy, a fantastic online portal specifically for the LGPS. We will continue to circulate updates to this resource and also details of other conferences and webinars that both Pensions Committee and Pension Board members may be interested in. This slide just gives an update on the national LGPS framework. It's been a busy quarter for the frameworks team. The LGPS national frameworks being hosted by the Norfolk Pension Fund. Two important frameworks are in production at the moment, the Actuarial Benefits and Governance Consultancy Framework and also cost transparency. The cost transparency is an interesting one because we're working in partnership with the Scheme Advisory Board on that. The team is also looking at the replacement for existing frameworks for stewardship, global custody, administration, operational support services. And then finally, we come to the admission agreements, which are part of the recommendations relating to this report. 2 new admissions and 5 novations. And I just pass over to my colleague Alex to say a few words on those. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Obviously, relatively standard item for those of you that are on the committee, but for Councillor Stannard's benefit particularly. These are the top 2, both contractor admissions, where a scheme employer, i.e. a body that exists with its membership via a statutory purpose, is letting a contract to a third-party contractor in order to protect the pensions accrual and future accrual for those members. We enter into individual admission agreements. The individual admission agreements are essentially guaranteed by that well-covenanted, long-standing scheme employer. So there is very little risk to any other employer in event of the failure of these individual contractors. As long as all of the appropriate legislative circumstances are met, these go through for sealing with the County Council, but they are required to be noted by the Pensions Committee as they occur. And we probably see 2 or 3 of these at each committee. Coming on to the novations, this is slightly more unusual. These are existing admission agreements, and you can see from this evidence that individual contractors will have multiple admissions relating to different contracts in order to get that look-through back to the letting body. In this case, our contractor, Edwards and Blake, that will be quite a familiar name to many people here, a provider of catering services to schools across Norfolk. They're owned by a larger organisation which is currently restructuring its corporate business, will therefore be novating the underlying contracts and therefore a requirement to novate the admissions to another group company. So that's a piece of legal work that we will be undertaking between now and the end of the year in order that that's all in place for the 1st of January. So that's working both with the contractor but also with those individual multi-academy trusts to ensure that that's appropriately papered from the get-go. Thank you.
Thank you both for that interesting summary of the report. Obviously, the recommendation is for the committee is invited to consider and note the content of this report. So, have we got any comments? Anybody would like to make? Brian, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Referring specifically to the comments about the inquiries we've received from the regarding the Palestine Solidarity campaign, you say you've had 96 pieces of correspondence from people, of which 55 are scheme members. I presume at the moment, Glenn, you've issued them with a kind of sort of holding response pending further information. Can you give any more detailed indication as to when we might expect to receive updated advice from the National Advisory Scheme, and indeed a statement from the government on this, so that we can get back to the people who've inquired about this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So we have provided responses to all 96, including where there has also been follow-up questions asked. At the moment, we have stated our position as we understand it. I think I would describe that as being that we operate as an LGPS fund in accordance with UK legislation, UK law, regulations relating to the LGPS, whether that's the 2016 investment regulations, and in terms of UK law, our fiduciary role and responsibility. So that's the response that we've given today. Now, obviously, what the situation that I've updated you on in this report is the receipt of the letter that went to all LGPS administering authorities from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, questioning the application of international law in terms of UK law, and therefore specifically LGPS regulations and statutory guidance. Now, that's, as I said in the briefing, is extremely complicated. The Scheme Advisory Board is looking as to whether legal advice is required, and the question has been put to government in terms of MHCLG and the Secretary of State and Minister for Local Government in terms of asking for comment. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting. The Secretary of State does have powers in Pension Services Act 2013 to instruct and direct LGPS funds accordingly. And I think a situation such as this, particularly those questions around really complex international law and how they apply to UK law and the LGPS, I think can only come from government with appropriate legal advice and legal opinion. In terms of timescales, that's more difficult to answer. But I think that's really important in terms of the next stage in this process, in terms of understanding the government's thinking and position on this. And it will be interesting to see, as governments have done in the past, if we look at Russia and Ukraine situation, where their Secretary of State has issued directions to the LGPS, to local government in that regard. So I think, while I can't give you timescales, because that's obviously Scheme Advisory Board and government, I think we certainly await any announcements with interest.
Okay. Any other questions? Steve.
Thank you. Morning, everybody, and apologies for being late. That's interesting, because clearly I think we would like to get as speedy a response as possible, because I think I can't imagine that the general approach wouldn't be that we would wish to dissociate ourselves from not just this conflict, but any conflict which involved allegations or association with genocide and war crimes. So I think getting the clarity around all of that sooner rather than later is good in every sense. So can I just be absolutely clear? This is the Secretary of State for MCLG, whatever it is these days, that's responsible. And is it that cabinet minister, or is it a minister? Because there might be opportunities for some of us, at least, to lobby to try and get an earlier answer. So I'd just like to know who we are seeking an answer from, if you can be more specific rather than just the Secretary of State.
As I understand it, the Scheme Advisory Board has approached MHCLG and the Secretary of State. I believe the letter, the campaign letter, was sent to the Secretary of State. And specifically, the campaign letter was sent to the Secretary of State asking for a response, so that the campaign has also asked for a response in addition to the Scheme Advisory Board. So, sorry, that was in the earlier briefing, Steve, but I'm conscious you didn't hear that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, if we can, it probably won't be the Secretary, it will come out under the Secretary of State's name. There's probably a minister. So it would be quite useful if we can find the minister, because we might have contacts.
Yeah, I should imagine it will be the Minister for Local Government, who's recently changed. Yeah, and name escapes me at the moment.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Any other comments on this report? Okay, can I take it then that we accept the recommendations that are within that report? Everybody happy? Okay, thank you. The next item is an update from the Pensions Oversight Board, and their chair, Brian Wigg, is going to respond to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll quickly go through the slides. Slide 1, which has just quickly disappeared, it is repeated at slide 4. It's just the recommendations. But talking on this slide, just to say that one employer representative remains vacant, and the selection process for an active and deferred scheme member is underway. The item on terms and reference for the Pensions Oversight Board, I'll come back to when we get on to slide 3, if I may. So we move on to slide 3, Glenn. The other items not covered specifically on today's agenda included updates to the board on its compliance, or the fund's compliance with the Pension Regulator's General Code of Practice, a satisfactory internal audit report on the fund's approach to the General Code of Practice and compliance, continuing oversight of cyber risk management, which committee will remember the board tends to keep an eye on this and report back to committee should there be any problems. And on knowledge and skills, just to acknowledge that board members attended the Pensions UK annual LGPS conference, and we have a full attendance for the November's joint training with Pensions Committee, which Glenn has mentioned. Just coming back to the terms of reference for the Pensions Oversight Board, following the email campaign which we just discussed, clarification was specifically sought by one board member of the board's role. Board was basically reminded of its fiduciary responsibility, and officers reviewed the original terms of reference, which go back to 2016, I believe. And that report on the terms of reference for POB are included in your papers on pages 68 to 79. But I would like to hand over to Joe Quarterman to take committee through the detail of the exercise that the officers undertook.
Thank you, Brian. Morning. So just a reminder of the Pensions Oversight Board. Under the regulations, they're referred to as local pension boards, but so there's no confusion. We call it Pensions Oversight Board here in Norfolk. As Brian said, the terms of reference were first adopted in 2015, and since then they've been subject to regular review to make sure they're still up to date. And that was the exercise that we actually went through just recently as part of our review of all our various terms of reference and policies. And the terms of reference have been updated. The terms of reference, as Brian referred to, there is a set in the pack, and they're also published on our website. The terms of reference set out the remit of the board, and as a reminder, that is to be, if you like, a critical friend to yourselves as Pensions Committee and us as officers. The board's made up of employer and employee representatives with an independent chair, Brian, and its regulatory role is to assist in securing compliance with regulations and to support you in ensuring that the pension fund is run efficiently and effectively. It's not a decision-making body, but it is there to support you. And as Brian referred to, you, the committee, have asked specifically your local pensions board to support you around cyber and compliance with the General Code of Practice, because they have the flexibility within their agenda that you don't have to make time for more detailed, in-depth studies such as that. So we've been through and we have updated the terms of reference. There's been no change to any of those roles and responsibilities or the makeup of the board or anything like that. There's just been some minor updates to things such as when the board was established, we had a reciprocal chairing arrangement. So we've taken that out now because we have an established independent chair. And it's still referred to the original terms of office, which were 2 years plus 4, but now board members serve a standard 4. So it's just been a general tidy up, referencing our updated training strategy and conflict of interest, and also that the board tends to meet online. Again, we've reflected that. So it's just been a general tidy up of the terms of reference, no change to any of the meat, if you like, the substance of the board's terms of reference.
Thank you, Jo. Any questions for Jo and for me on the other items that I've outlined before we move on to slide 4, which is the recommendation, repeat of what was in slide 1?
Any questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, are you going to tell us the recommendations, or I think?
Yeah, the recommendation is that the Pensions Committee invited to note the contents of the report, including the recommended adoption of the latest updates to the POB's terms of reference, or set out in Appendix A.
Okay, thank you. Are the committee okay with this report? Everybody accept those recommendations? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item, which is the annual accounts and accounts report on page 87, and this is in the hands of Alex Younger and Charlotte Alexander.
Do the briefest of introductions to Charlotte, who's doing the item, as she does all the work on the preparation of the accounts.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. So we're here today with an item that will look reasonably familiar for you from the June committee. Just as a reminder, in June we brought to you the statement of accounts, and I'm really pleased today to be able to bring you the annual report and statement of accounts. So this is to highlight the work that's been done by the team on the annual report. As we are now approaching kind of the sign-off point with audit, the recommendations included within this is to also be aware of any comments arising in the ISA 260 audit results report, which we do hope to be able to share with you soon, and to consider anything that you would like raised in the letter of representation. Otherwise, this will be looked at by the chair and reviewed as part of that normal process. So today I'm going to run you very, very quickly through the statement of accounts, some of the highlights that we brought to you in June, and then talk to you a bit more about the annual report guidance that we had. Remind you of the timetable that we're looking at for approval, and highlight to you some of the accounting and audit processes that you should be aware of that have taken place, and highlight to you upcoming events within that. Next slide, please. So the annual report guidance was updated in April 2024. So this is actually the second year of implementation of this advice. And this guidance was generated by SIPFA and the Scheme Advisory Board in combination. And last year, this was on a best endeavours basis. But I'm really, really pleased to say even last year, we were able to meet all of the must and should criteria. And we've met all criteria in the current year as well that is required under the guidance. And the way that we've actually facilitated that is by joining together a work group among the officers from all of the different departments of the fund to be able to collate the information that feeds into that annual report. And when you look through the annual report, I really hope it points out to you the collaboration between the different elements of the fund and highlights to the readers of the accounts all of the different functions of the fund that do take place in order to ensure that we operate effectively. The key changes to that guidance included a raft of new KPIs that you will see in the report. These do have slightly different targets within them, so we've highlighted where that is the case. And this is to make the report comparable among the Scheme Advisory Board members. I would highlight, though, that Norfolk does follow best practice when we do report our KPIs as well, and that doesn't always mix up with what the Scheme Advisory Board requires us to report on within the KPI section of the report. You'll see some asset allocation tables, and you'll also see a lot of information about representation and training. I think training has been hammered home during this committee so far, with the changes that are coming through the Good Governance Review. On to the next slide, please. This should be a familiar slide. I'm just going to repeat a couple of the key figures from the financial accounts. Our contributions continue to exceed our benefits being paid out. So our contributions increased by 3.5% and benefits by 11%. Our investment income increased by 10%, apologies, there's an extra zero on there, not 100%, and closing net assets increased by 2.8%. And the number of pooled investments, or the proportion of pooled investments within the fund, also increased. On to the next slide, please. Now, the timetable for producing the accounts, luckily most of it is behind us at this point. We're in the final stages of the external audit with Ernst & Young, and we're just working through the last few timing adjustments that are always necessary within the accounts to reflect the private market investments that we do make, and when those valuations are received in relation to statutory reporting timetables. We intend to take to audit committee in November the final audit results report and the very final version of the accounts, and once we have those available, they will be shared via email, as has been in previous years, with committee to note and make any comments on. So all that being well, we intend to have our audit opinion in place by December 2025. And the reason this is slightly later, even though I'm coming here today and telling you that we're majority complete, is that we do need to sign off our accounts at the same time as Norfolk County Council, as the administering authority of the fund. So they will be commencing their audit shortly, and they hope to have theirs finalised by that point. We do have a publication date, which is a statutory date for Norfolk Pension Fund. The other dates that we have in the table are statutory dates for Norfolk County Council. The publication date for the pension fund of the 1st of December 25. So at that point, we will provide a copy of the annual reports and accounts in whatever format we have available, but based on the work that we've got today, I expect that to be in the final format, whether it has the audit results report within it or whether it is to be added at a slightly later date, to be able to provide that on our website at the 1st of December. And just to give you a reminder here as well, obviously we're bringing the annual report to you at this point. Although the audit results report does cover both the annual report and the financial statement of accounts, the primary work of the audit is on the financial statement of accounts, and it's the auditor's responsibility to ensure that the annual report is consistent with their understanding based on the annual statement of accounts that the fund is operating in line with how it's reporting so within the annual report. So that is everything from myself. If I pass back to Chair for recommendations.
Thank you very much. The recommendations are on, I won't read them out, but they're on page 90 of the papers, item 10. Has anybody got any questions? Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, on page 89, paragraph 4.5, you indicate that August is now the largest of the employer financial reporting dates to the fund, and that the volume of work has grown significantly over the past decade as more schools move towards academy status. So really a simple question. Presumably, that's not going to impact significantly on the timetable that you've outlined in the reports, all nicely under control.
Yep, the work that's been undertaken by the team in producing that reporting is now complete. So we're really pleased that that has gone ahead exactly as planned, and we'll be issuing final reports for those imminently.
Any other questions? No? Well, thank you for that report, Charlotte. Appreciate that. I assume everybody's happy with the recommendations, so we'll move on to the next item, which is Responsible Investment Update Report, including summary of climate risk and monitoring. Including a summary of the climate risk monitoring report, which is on page 259. And I believe this is with Alex and Charlotte again.
This one you just get me for, I'm afraid, although Charlotte may be better at answering the questions, we'll see. But thank you very much, Chair. So this report will be, I think, familiar in substance to all members of the committee. It's a 6-monthly update that we provide on responsible investment matters. Specifically, and this was very much its focus historically, shareholder voting and ESG, environmental, social and governance matters and engagement, specifically undertaken by the Access Pool. Now, that emphasis very much reflects that we have moved into an increasingly pooled environment. Our pooled company, if you want to describe it as that, is now responsible for an increasing amount of the investments of the fund. I think we saw the figure when we looked at the annual report, well north of 60%. And actually, as we know, with the Fit for the Future changes, from the 1st of April, that oversight, and I'll use that term loosely at this point because the transition to new pooling arrangements will take a while, but the responsibility for oversight in the first instance will lie with the appointed pool company. What we've looked to do is just develop this report out a bit. So we've changed the title, which is always a sign that we must have done something, obviously. So moving away from simply describing it as governance and shareholder engagement to that wider title of responsible investment. And whilst we've not lost anything in terms of those liquid assets, and all of the liquid assets that we're talking about here are managed through the pool, so either the quoted equities, the public listed fixed income corporate bonds, upon which engagement activity and voting specifically, it relates to public shareholdings, is undertaken. But also to include some details about some of the private market programs that we have. Now, we're not seeking to be exhaustive here every 6 months because we'd probably need to establish a subcommittee to go through that, but to provide committee with details and flavour of some of the things that you've engaged on in the past and agreed to in terms of investment. And so this time around, we're very much talking about the timber holdings, the affordable housing, and the climate impact real estate. Interesting, all of them, and slightly more recent appointments as well, and I think also have moved us further into that idea of impactful use of investment monies, still with a fiduciary prioritisation on it, but the ability, if you like, to, where possible, use monies impactfully. So if we talk about the affordable housing first, you'll recall that this is a mandate appointment via Access of Legal and General Investment Management. And we actually elected to put 130 million into this, which was by far the largest allocation made by any individual Access fund, and is significant if you looked at affordable housing allocations for the LGPS as a whole. When we made this investment, we split it into 2 vehicles, and this was really to provide a diversification benefit, but also to allow some focus on, as was, the Access region. So essentially, that triangle that runs from the north of Norfolk down to the Isle of Wight, but we don't worry about Surrey and London. But what we looked at within that is that half of those investments will be made within that triangle. The remainder could be anywhere in the country. What's interesting is the actual Norfolk-specific investments that we talk about on that slide are all within that that national vehicle, East Anglia is a good place to find opportunity for affordable housing, so that we can see sites which largely, and I think these are the ones that reflect this, but are across 3 local authorities in Norfolk, and are obviously providing a number of homes. This is at the 30th of June. There have been more transactions since then that will have grown out the Norfolk, if you like, piece of this portfolio, and also if we cross south of the border into Suffolk as well. The other piece that we're talking about here is the Impact Real Estate Fund. As a reminder, this was the appointment of the manager Orchard Street. It was again via Access, so this is a pool appointment. We've invested in this primarily alongside Essex, who have a well-developed impact programme, although they're not, interestingly enough, an investor in affordable housing. The aim of this as a vehicle is to take less high quality property, and that's less high quality in terms of it, to steal the phrase, fit for the future-ness, and then to bring it up to modern standards in terms of its energy use efficiency, standards of biodiversity at the margins, anything really that will provide local impact, and to do that through also a social lens in terms of the local employment opportunities that these developments can often provide. There are 2 initial assets that have gone into that portfolio. I can't claim that either Warrington or Newcastle are anywhere near Norfolk, but this fund in itself is aiming to allocate 40% into the Access region as those opportunities become available. But I think it's really good to see that early deployment within the vehicle. So if we move on again. So finally, the specific area that I was going to talk about, and there's more detail of it clearly provided in the report, was the Stafford Timberland Funds. Now, this is our longest standing investments. I think SIT9 is just about pre-COVID. SIT10 invested in a couple of years ago, the numbers referring to the vintages of the individual funds. And then most recently, and we also confirmed this in the investment update, we've invested a top-up amount in what's called the Continuation Fund, which is essentially, as those time-limited funds that have a 10 to 15-year life come to the end, the opportunity to then convert some of those interests from exiting investors into, and this is not meant to be a pun on trees, but evergreen vehicles. So essentially to provide income for the fund for duration, really, really suitable asset as the pension fund matures and it becomes more critical to us to meet any gap that will emerge as contributions fall with improved funding and the scheme matures with more pensioners. So what we can't carry on doing is simply paying a proportion of the contributions out through the pensions payroll because they won't cover it. And assets like this provide us with really good sources of income, in addition to the fact that timber as an asset naturally sequestrates carbon. So these are essentially carbon sinks. There are good statistics even when forests are felled, and we are harvesting this timber, but not clear felling entire estates in one go or anything like that. This is sustainable, managed forestry. And then the growth of new trees will then serve to sequester further carbon. And the majority of the carbon in timber is not subject to immediate destruction. This is not going to end up as firewood in the extreme example, if you like. What this portfolio also does, it has good adherence to UN Sustainable Development Goals in areas such as biodiversity, water use, which is really important in the growth of any crops or agriculture, and you can do that well or you can do it badly, and also around certain social factors. In particular, and it's not so much an issue for this portfolio because these are forest estates mainly within the developed world. They're in Australasia, both in Australia and New Zealand, South America as well, and in North America principally, but ensuring that they are also adherent to good practices of social management, workforce management, that kind of piece, and treatment of their local communities. So if we just move on. And then finally, and this is just the abridged version of this report, there's more discussion later in the meeting, but you'll be aware that now, and I can hardly believe this, for a period of 5 years, we've introduced this monitoring of the climate statistics for our portfolios. Most recently, and this was only 6 months ago, we started to monitor some of the fixed income portfolios in addition to the public equities. That's not that we were massively behind the game. That's more about the emergence of data in relation to fixed income securities that simply wasn't collated previously. The good news on all of this is if you benchmark the measured portfolio against the global market, and as a proxy for that, we use that index, which is MSCI's All Countries World Index, so the composition of essentially the world's public companies, you can see that we score positively on all those measurements, particularly so on WACC, the weighted average carbon intensity, but equally showing really good portfolio data for the carbon intensity and the percentage of the portfolio with ties to fossil fuels. So if we move on again. Oh, apologies. Charlotte's just pointed out, could we just run back through the slide pack and find the access stewardship slide? Thank you. Sorry. Apologies. I was just running away with myself there. So this was really talking about what Access has been doing as well. And I think what's really important here is they became a signatory to the UK Stewardship Code in February 2025. Now that is not an easy bar to meet. You have to provide a lot of evidence. And I think in the past, one could easily badge portfolios with various codes and badges. That's not the case anymore. You can definitely fail that assessment, and people do. So that was a really good result for Access in demonstrating how its engagement and voting activity, it really flows through the portfolio, the setting of RI policy, etc. As well established principles of framework for engagement to support that. And I think you can see that through the summary of engagement, which features in Appendix C of the report as well. So in that slightly unusual order, if we can now move back towards the end, and we'll bring you to the recommendation, unless there are any questions.
Any questions? Steve? Yeah.
Thank you. Can we go back to the one with the social housing on it, please? That's it. I think that's quite exciting, actually. The potential, certainly locally, but in general, seems to be huge. I'm assuming that it's because it's a very long-term investment in a fixed asset, which is probably going to increase in value without going anywhere and not being at any risk of being moved to other parts of the country or other countries or whatever, then it's a good, sound investment for us. Is there a ceiling for the amount that we could sensibly put in there, or at the moment is it, we'll chase any opportunity that looks as if it's likely to work for us?
Sorry. Is there a ceiling? I think our investment advisor will always say that it's appropriate to have diversification within a fund. It's not an enormous allocation in terms of the fund as a whole, but it was the first time we'd allocated to the sector. It will be an interesting conversation to have when we talked about pooling, the pool provider, as to how and if they like affordable housing as an asset class. I think they do, in terms of who we're going to talk about later. But it's also interesting in terms of as we move towards an environment where there's been greater emphasis on specifically allocating to local investment. Now, local investment can come in many shapes and sizes. You could back small businesses through loans, you could be backing infrastructure projects, or you could be playing that part of a portfolio through affordable housing. So I think there's definitely scope, but there'd have to be a number of pieces of diligence and work to get there. I mean, in terms of the ceiling, is there a realistic ceiling on the need for affordable housing in this country that would go beyond the demand that, LGPS assets? There's not, is there? What is important as an investor, it's not so much that these assets will increase in value. It's very much as a yield play, and the viability of many of these investments does drive out of the grant provision within them from Homes England. So there's that test, if you like, to get that up to, and we're not hugely yielding assets, but to get that to an acceptable yield on an asset from what is essentially a lowish risk investment. But also there are reputational risks associated with them. We were very clear in talk why one of the reasons we selected LGIM. If you're in an LGIM home, you know it. A lot of these investments are quite financially focused, so you wouldn't perhaps know who the back-end manager of it is. You might have a contracted Flagship Housing or whoever turning up occasionally to cut the grass, but LGIM are very keen that you know it's an LGIM house, and I suspect if you had issues with mouldy bathrooms or anything, the one thing the chief executive of LGIM doesn't want, frankly, because he's got a pretty big other book of business is someone turning up and pointing the finger at them. So I think we find that's quite a good skin in the game, alignment of interest point on this particular portfolio.
Can I just understand, I'm assuming, and thank you for that, that was what I hoped you were going to say, more or less. But I'm assuming that whilst we might be, through the funds, owning the properties, we wouldn't actually be managing the properties or being involved in any way in doing that. And I can see from the nod of your head that you're confirming that, which is also a relief. And I mean, how far would we go in specifying what we would expect to see in terms of the build quality of properties that we were associated with? And the third bit, and going into the Homes England investment area in there, do we have any indication from Homes England at the moment about how they view this sort of thing and whether they consider it to be the kind of area that they would want to invest in because of the leverage that it would give?
So Homes England are extremely positive, and that's at least in part because a number of more traditional providers have been somewhat stymied in their ability to develop new property by some of their financial constraints. I'm not pretending I'm an expert on the sector, but certainly it's one of the things that's opened it up to other sources of capital. I think they're also aware of the sheer weight of demand and that perhaps the traditional sector will struggle to meet that. In terms of, I can confirm, we definitely don't manage it. And interestingly, locally, LGIM have 5, I believe, appointed providers, Flagship Housing, and they have to hit very high quality criteria. We all know there are better and worse social landlords. In terms of the specification of buildings, so the manager will be diligencing properties as they are built, and they have an extensive team to do that before the handovers, if you like. In terms of energy efficiencies, they have to be A or B. Now, there's some debate about whether they should just be A. The reality is that some of the definitions that might imply something would be A then count against certain things in terms of things like heat pumps and things. So I think until that is truly clarified, you might not see that. There also, in terms of, there's some realism about if you're asking to take a property off certain large developments, will you get to that level? They're also good in terms of some of those social things. So, for example, they have a policy, and I had experience with this with a relative, actually. I found it quite difficult to believe that if someone who's probably not in the best situation in the world is granted social housing, it doesn't necessarily mean there'll be any floor coverings or any grass. Now, they have a policy, for example, and I'm giving it because it's a good story, but I think it is a good illustrative example, that all of their homes, when they're handed over to a new tenant, either when they're brand new or as new tenants come on board, they will have floor coverings and grass in the back garden. So I think there are good positives that come out of this portfolio and a bit of that kind of LGIM spin on it, if you like, which has brought benefits directly to the communities in which they're working. That has benefits to us as an investor because if you treat people well, A, they tend to pay their rent and you tend to have less turnover of people as well.
Brian?
The report obviously relates to a 6-monthly update from the activity undertaken by Access, and obviously the slides that you've put up for us, Alex, have gone into detail in terms of initiatives being undertaken, particularly what we've just been talking about with local investment. I'd just like to ask you, overall, are you satisfied with the level of progress that has been made over the last year or so in terms of promoting responsible investment, and what do you regard as the biggest challenges facing us in the near future? And the subsidiary question to that is obviously here in this report we are talking about Access, but in all likelihood, and I know we've got a report later, we'll be moving over to another fund, probably Central. So can we expect a similar approach to ESG if we move to another fund, whichever fund it is, or have you identified anything that could be different? Thank you.
Yes, so to start at the beginning of that question, I think, yes, we are pretty happy with the progress that Access has made over the last year to 18 months. It was, and this is, I suppose, a lesson for pooling. It's quite hard to agree, even amongst like-minded pension funds, policies that cover all. So the development and agreement of the RI policy, which went from being about a page and a half to a proper comprehensive document, that was really strong. I think the fact that Access appointed an RI advisor, that was a really strong move and has brought forward further developments. I think what it's done is it means that there is a good framework, and you've pointed, pooling's changing the world, but there's a good framework for the management of those legacy assets for the period when we will need to onboard them to a new pool, because that is a 2 to 5 year project. There's no doubt about that. Transitioning that volume of assets out of an existing legal structure that then needs to be wound up is a difficult and challenging thing. But I think Access is in a pretty good place at the moment. I think, and we'll never know how well this would have ultimately gone, but some of those early stage private market investments, the affordable housing being a good case in point, and that was one of the things, I would say that was one of the things we pushed at. There was this desire of who does what first. That was great. Access had also aligned the timber assets. So I think they were making lots of steps in the right direction. Our responsible investment, the management of ESG issues, was one of the criteria under which we assessed the potential pool partners that we could have going forward. I think, you won't find an institution working the LGPS that's weak in this area, but I think we are particularly happy with our chosen provider's approach and depth to the team that undertakes this work. And what that does allow you to do, which is what Access didn't have, if you've got a full-time team engaged in this, whilst monies may still be managed by a third party, you've got more in-depth scrutiny of that aspect of the management. But secondly, if you have some engagement priorities, you can take those forward yourself. And I think that will be a bit of a game changer, actually, in how these monies are managed going forward. We are all, of course, aware that the government is seeking to pool that policy stuff a little more as well. They've been pretty clear they don't want to see, we'll see when we a multi-teens number of funds picking separate RI policies within a pooled structure. That will be a challenge. As I said, it was a challenge in Access. It will be a challenge again within the new pooling organisation. But I think there's the fact that there's a lot of resource and a lot of engagement, to excuse the pun on it, I think that bodes really well for the future, actually. And I'm quite excited about what we might get from the new provider in terms of the reporting. Some of that climate stuff, they may actually be able to do that in a little bit more detail for us. So I think there's lots of things here that are quite exciting about the future development, but I'm not going to pretend it's an easy path to get from A to B, because the agreement of policy is tricky, but just the physical movement of assets around the piece as well will be quite tough, quite hard work. And that's acknowledged by anybody that's moving pools and any of the pools that are receiving funds. So I think we're all on the same page with that.
Any more questions? No? Okay, well, sorry. Thank you for that report, and I think we'll move on to the next item, which is actually to exclude the public for the next items 9 to 14. So the committee is asked to consider excluding the public from the meeting under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 for consideration of the items below on the grounds they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Act. And the public interest in maintaining the exemptions outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. The committee will be presented with the conclusion of the public interest test carried out by the report author, and it is recommended to confirm the exclusion. Are we all okay with that? Okay. Oh, sorry. And Nicola's got to read out a report here.
Thank you. The reports within agenda items 9 to 14 contain financial, business and commercial information, including details about third-party company operations, which could significantly weaken their position in a competitive environment by revealing this activity to competitors. Inappropriate disclosure would or would be likely to prejudice their interests, which may expose the Norfolk Pension Fund, Norfolk County Council to legal action in the future.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, I think we'll break for 15 minutes, comfort break, and if we can be back here in 15 minutes, and we'll go through the excluded items. Thank you.